Hello, and welcome back to the Let's Talk Adoption podcast with Kim and Heather. We have some great questions that we would love to answer for some listeners who wrote in today, and we're excited to jump into those and really give justice to those questions and give the information and encouragement that is what we're really known for here at Let's Talk Adoption. And as always, be sure to subscribe, and you can write to us at letstalkadoption.com with anything that is on your mind or show suggestions. Heather, I'm excited to have this call with you today, this podcast episode where we get to answer questions that are really on the minds of our listeners.
Right. And most of these questions actually came in after our last episode, where we answered the questions that women ask as they're exploring adoption. And I was super excited to get the feedback, the response we got. Really, I think questions, observations that built on what we talked about last time. So, these are going to be some great questions we compiled and kind of pulled together things that were similar so that we can really provide some clarity around these items.
So let's jump into the very first one.
Mhm.
And this is actually something that is often an adoption myth. But here's the question. Can I choose the adoptive family for my baby?
And a lot of times I think women hear that choosing adoptive parents for their baby can be part of adoption, but I think what they don't understand is that it really is part of modern adoption. And you don't have to go out and search for people or think if you know anybody who might want to adopt. There are families who are waiting to adopt that you can see and view through your adoption professional. And what that looks like usually starts with, you know, a conversation about what are you specifically looking for? Are you looking for, say, a two-parent family, a mom and a dad? Are you looking for a couple who may live somewhere geographically, who may have certain interests? And it can get kind of specific. Sometimes I hear women who say, I want a family who has horses. I want a family who, values education. And even, I want a family who's vegan or vegetarian. I mean, I could go on and on. Through the years. I have heard so many different requests, as well as requests are kind of also somewhat, I don't want to say general, but things like, I want someone who's going to love my baby. I want someone who's going to provide stability. So there really runs the gamut of things you can ask for. And then you can look through families that match your requests that your adoption professional will provide. And then you can talk to one or more of them. You can talk on the phone, talk on video chat, email, text back and forth to really get to know them as part of your adoption decision. I believe that really, deciding on adoption means looking at all of the parts of adoption, including looking at waiting families, because it can be hard to visualize or picture what adoption and especially an open adoption can look like unless you can also see the types of families who are waiting to adopt. And again, Kim, you mentioned adoption myths. I think the characteristics and the types of waiting families often are in our minds maybe as myths based on something we've seen on TV, maybe based on something that has been in our personal life, if we have been in foster care or have some type of experience with that. So it's really good to look at adoption as a whole, start to finish, including, like I said, looking at adoptive parents, even talking to them if that will help you decide if adoption is something that is right for you and your baby. Now, one of the choices within choosing parents also is choosing what that future contact will look like, because you definitely want to um, find families who are open to that if that is your hope as well. But by all means, there are families, a wide variety of families out there. And you most definitely can choose the adoptive parents for your child.
And I loved that you talked about how you get to picture your child with a family.
Hmm.
Because, and I've heard you say this many times over the years, Heather, that modern adoption is not placing your child with a faceless stranger.
Right.
And I think that's so comforting. And I love that we're talking about this today on Let's Talk Adoption because women really need to be informed that the choice of family is completely 100% up to them.
Right. And I will say, if you ever hear differently, if you hear that no, you don't get to choose the parents, please know that you can call another adoption professional
Mm.
because part of ethical adoption today is giving you, the biological parents of the child, choices. And one of those main choices is choosing the parents for your child, having the opportunity to get to know them, having the opportunity for future contact, and really having those conversations so you can set those expectations prior to the adoption. And
And
I do want to say too, I've worked with people over the years who will say, I didn't really find an adoptive family that I felt like, or my adoption agency, there wasn't much of a choice. Please don't give up based on that. Look around. You can call other adoption professionals. You can tell your adoption professional, I'd like to see more families. Can you find more families? There are an endless variety. And if you're looking for something specific, such as maybe you want an African American couple to adopt your baby. They are out there. They can be a little harder to find because they are in demand, but there absolutely are Black and biracial couples waiting to adopt. There really there you should be able to find exactly what you want
mhm,
before you make the decision to proceed with adoption.
bilingual families, Catholic
Mhm.
families, you name
Mhm.
it.
Yes.
Really just, voice what's on your heart.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think,
Mhm.
I mentioned a vegan and vegetarian. I remember one young woman I worked with many years ago who, it was just after a presidential election, and she specifically wanted a family who voted for one of the two candidates in that last election. It was that specific because in her life, politics was important to her, and she wanted someone who not just believed the same things, but actually went out and voted also. So, there's no request that's too far out there. We've had worked with moms who wanted a family who would help facilitate a water birth of the baby. Um, it just, like I say, there's really nothing too far out there.
I was actually thinking of that birth mom. When you said the vegan thing, I was like, I wonder if she's going to talk about the one who wanted a specific political
Yes.
affiliation voting record.
Yep.
I was thinking of that. It's funny that you brought that up. Well, I guess no better place than the podcast.
That's right.
So let's go ahead here. The next question. Can you change your mind after choosing adoption? And by the way, we need to mention that this is for private adoption, where it's a
Yes.
voluntary relinquishment, where you are choosing to work with an agency or an adoption professional and pick out a family. And this is private adoption, meaning this is not necessarily the same thing you can expect if you are working with the foster system, if you have a case open with Child Protective Services. So I just want to stay within the bubble of private adoption on this question as well and the previous question.
Right. So, can you change your mind after choosing adoption? Eh, It's kind of hard to answer that as worded because it depends when you choose adoption. If you choose adoption when you're 4 months along, yes, you can change your mind. Um, you have your whole pregnancy to change your mind. You have after you deliver. There comes a time when you will sign the adoption consent papers. Before that, you will be counseled by an attorney or a social worker, and you will be provided with information about, resources if you choose to parent, what signing adoption means, and the length of time you have to change your mind after you sign, if any. Once that time frame has passed, then no, you can no longer change your mind, which is why it's really important to take the time. If you're thinking about adoption, start exploring it as soon as you start thinking about it, because there's not a commitment just to explore adoption. Because I really think that when women are given the opportunity to learn the facts, to take the time to weigh their choice, to explore all their options, they're going to find themselves more confident that they're making the best decision for themselves and their baby. Also, for me, it's really important that we help women make this decision from a place of stability and not a place of crisis. So we always want to be sure that, when we're doing this, we're not in that state of mind that is just in utter chaos and collapse and crisis and overwhelm. We need to get some rest. We need to get some food, some water. Take the time we need to learn about adoption, start to finish, and really be able to come to that decision from a place where we've taken the time, we've had the counseling, we've weighed our options, and we've decided this is the best decision.
Hmm. And right. And sometimes women can be in scenarios where they thought they would parent,
Right.
and then that plan falls through for one reason or another. The idea of how they would parent and where they would live and the childcare they would have and the friends and family support that they would have, that can fall through. And so then maybe even toward the end of pregnancy or at the hospital, they're making an adoption plan.
Hmm.
Um, and I just wanted to point that out, that if you don't have tons of time to work with, that's still okay. I know we've said this before, and Heather has said this many times through the years, that it's never too early or too late to start
Hmm.
thinking about and exploring adoption. So, and I also want to point out about changing your mind after choosing adoption. Of course, as Heather said, every state has different time frames, and those time frames start ticking depending on the specific situation at hand. But I also want to make it clear that while many states allow birth fathers to sign their consent prior sign their consent to the adoption
Hmm.
prior to the birth, no states allow a birth mother to sign her consent to this adoption prior to the birth of the baby. So there is zero place in the US where the adoption is irrevocable prior to the birth.
Hmm.
So that's really
Right.
good to know.
Yeah. And that is, you know, when you are signing, you will know. Attorneys are excellent at advising you on your rights and your timeframes. So, you will be advised of everything when you're signing, including the length of time after signing you have to change your mind, if any.
And there can be paperwork that you sign along the way, such
Hmm.
as a medical release to allow the agency to request your medical records. There can be just acknowledgments that you sign, little forms that you fill out, and worksheets that you fill out. I would hope there's some gentle screening and support that is given, but those are not signing your consent.
Absolutely.
Mhm. So, Heather, what does open adoption really look like?
Well, I'm guessing that this means, what does the contact really look like after the adoption? And I know we've spoken about it before, Kim, about post-adoption contact agreements. These can be so valuable after the adoption takes place, and we really stress that there always be one signed. Because what that does is it sets the expectations both for the birth family and for the adoptive family as to what that contact is going to look like in the future. Now, a lot of that contact is based on the relationship that has been built prior to the adoption. For instance, if you were talking over FaceTime, if you were texting a few times a week, you know, that relationship is a real relationship beginning to form, and that may continue over into after the adoption. And those are the things that a post-adoption contact agreement will detail out. Are we going to text? Are we going to FaceTime? Are we going to get together for face-to-face visits? And how often? Now, it may seem a little, it may feel a little artificial. It may feel like you're making a friendship contract if you already feel like you're friends. And that's not what it is at all. But it really is putting into writing what we're kind of expecting and agreeing to try to avoid any type of hurt feelings or disagreement in the future. So what it looks like really depends on, like I say, how it has started to grow and develop. But it typically is often kind of the same. It can be periodic texting with updates on the child or even, the family. It can be emails and pictures. It can be connections over social media, even like a private Facebook page or something like that. What we often see people really wanting to know is, okay, but what about that in-person visit? What does that look like? And that usually means getting together once or twice a year, maybe for a meal and some time at a park when the child's young. It can vary depending on where you are, what you're doing, what your relationship is. But in the best open adoption scenario, it is just that continuation of a relationship that has started because we all love the same child. For birth parents, typically you're not looking to be everyday mom, but you certainly feel great when you are included, when you are remembered. And for adoptive parents, they want to include you. They want to remember you. They want to acknowledge that you're a very important part of their life and their family. But again, that agreement, it just lays out those boundaries. There may be times after adoption where the birth mother in particular, she may still be going through a season of grief, of saying goodbye, and she may want to step back from that contact, but that doesn't mean that it necessarily goes away forever. And I think that's good to know kind of for everyone. Even if, we on the birth parent side do step back, it doesn't mean that we've changed our minds about open adoption. It doesn't mean that we care about our child or the adoptive parents any less. It just means that for a time I just need to pause. And I will say it's okay to share those things. Um, it's natural, and it's good to know that, gentle boundaries are okay. Um, it's also okay to say things like, you know, I know we're in between, times of getting together, but could you send over a couple pictures and an update? That's okay too. So again, every open adoption is a little bit different, but at the heart, it is staying in touch because we all love the same child.
Hmm. And as you have completed a post-adoption contract or communication agreement, um, sometimes adoptive parents may be a little more generous, and your
Mhm.
relationship may grow beyond that, and some may adhere to it strictly. Either way, it's good to have that just outline of what you can expect. How can I know if adoptive parents are safe?
So that is probably one of the questions that I answer the most. And I think that again is asked because of things we see in fictional movies on, TV or, things like that. It is Parents who are waiting to adopt through a private adoption have been through something called a home study. And a home study is so much more than that sounds. That sounds like it's a home inspection. And there most definitely is a home inspection for any safety issues around the home. But it also is a real deep dive into who they are and where they've come from. It has extensive background checks. I mean, I think there's 4 or 5 different background checks, and if they've lived in other states, they need those checks in every state they've lived in. There is a deep dive into their financial status and history, ensuring that they have the resources to parent and that they are stable from a financial standpoint. There are medical exams involved, interviews, both together as a couple and one-on-one. They they have to submit references, like people that the social worker will also go and speak with. They have to talk in detail about how they plan on parenting. What types of parenting, what types of discipline do they intend to incorporate into their parenting? Then they actually have to have a lot of education around not just parenting, but parenting as an adoptive parent. So, this is all part of this home study process that is done once, but then it also has to be updated every year. So, it's an ongoing preparation. So that's just the screening aspect of it. And it's very, very detailed, very thorough. And even after that, the social worker who's performing all this and gathering all this will sit down and write a lengthy, detailed report and approve them or not approve them to adopt. So that's just how they get to being even able to adopt. Beyond that, you have the opportunity to get to know them. And that is really important. And you also have the opportunity to ask questions of them and of the adoption professional that introduced you to them. You can also change your mind. If you've been talking to a family and just don't feel at peace, you can talk to another one. You can talk to more than 2 or 3. You can interview them to really find the peace you need to move forward. But,
Mhm.
you know, in I think it really comes as a surprise to most birth mothers to find out just how much screening and preparation is required to adopt a child in private adoption.
And I think too, often people have an expectation or a notion that it's very similar to the foster system, where
Mhm.
if they choose this, this means their child goes into a family for a few weeks, then gets bounced to a different family, and then that family can't foster the child anymore, so they get bounced and bounced and bounced around and never get settled and loved and accepted the way that you would want that child to be loved and accepted if you're choosing adoption voluntarily for this child. Adoptive parents generally come to adoption after much soul searching. Their hearts are just longing for a child. And I've said it before, when you choose adoption, you and your child are the answer to their prayers. So that is such a different frame of mind from thinking, oh, if I choose this, my child gets bounced around and never has stability and they could be at risk because no one has bonded with them and everything. But in private adoption, generally speaking, adoptive parents are wanting to start bonding with the child from as early as possible, and they are wanting to be that permanent mom and dad to that child for a lifetime, and they are adopting because their whole intention is to love and accept this child as their own just as much as any biological child. And sometimes adoptive parents even say, I mean, I feel like in a way I love my child through adoption more than if this child came to me through biology.
Right. And Kim, that is one of the things that I really try to speak about as often as I can, which is there is a huge difference between private adoption and foster care or adoption through foster care for birth parents. And one of the biggest differences with private adoption is that you, as the birth mother, stay in control of the entire process. You choose the family. You decide what type of contact you want in the future. You are making a thoughtful plan for your baby instead of having the decisions made for you by the state. And part of that is, again, choosing the parents, getting to know them as part of making your adoption plan. Foster care is designed for situations where the state has to step in, maybe because there's some unsafe situation. But private adoption, it allows you to make a proactive, loving plan with complete choice and with your involvement.
Heather, this question wasn't sent in, but it comes to mind. So, if a woman is wanting to choose adoption, like the way we're talking about,
Hmm.
but her previous children have cases open with the foster
Hmm.
system, they're in foster families or with relatives, she didn't get to choose that per se. And so now she's pregnant and thinking, could this be an option for this baby?
Yes, absolutely. Even if you have an open case with the state, with a child you've already had, you can make a private adoption plan with the baby you're carrying. You can choose the parents. You can have ongoing contact, which that can be so important, especially if you are in a scenario where you have lost a child to the foster system and maybe your rights were terminated and you don't know where your child is or how your child is. Private adoption is completely different. You can stay in touch no matter what's happened in the past.
Mhm. Well, here is one last question for this episode of Let's Talk Adoption. Will I regret choosing adoption? And she's quite young, so I'm assuming this is a birth mother question.
Yeah. You know, regret is a funny thing. Um, I like to think that what any of us should do is make the best decision at the time with the information and the resources we have. Which is why, for me personally, it is so important that women are fully educated on all of their pregnancy choices so that they can make the best decision from a place of information. They know. They know the truth about every option and they are able to make a decision based on that truth, based on the facts. So when women choose adoption, knowing that uh, it is permanent at some point, I would I would say rather than think of it that way, it might be best to think that when you're pregnant, you only have three options. And the reality of the situation is that whichever decision you make, your life is going to change. And so that's why you owe it to yourself and your baby to learn the facts about all the options so that you are empowered and you are able to make the best decision you can. Now, you will experience grief if you choose adoption. But I'm also going to say women will experience grief regardless of the choice they choose, even if they choose to parent. Even in the best families where parenting is a child is prayed for and wanted, there is some grief involved as your life changes. As you realize, I'm not just taking care of me anymore. I am solely responsible in many cases for the 24-hour care of this newborn also. So I kind of like to, not really frame this around regret, but frame this around education, being prepared, and understanding that no matter the choice you choose, your life has already changed. With adoption, there will be grief. There will be change. There will be a time when you probably do question your decisions. Question, did I make the right choice? That can go on for a long time. But when we are making these decisions from a place of empowerment, when you can choose the family, when you can choose to have future contact, you know this is not goodbye forever. You have a relationship, maybe not built yet, but maybe just started. I've also had women share that that brings such peace when they feel like they are still a very important, accepted, wanted part of their child's life. And it's also really important for us to separate grief in adoption from normal postpartum hormonal um, rushes that are just part of the female body after having a baby. Many times after delivery, well, not many times, most times, the hormone changes that shift abruptly can really, whew, they can do a number on you. And so taking a little time, even if that means, you feel like you need to put your signing off for a few days until you feel a little more, balanced. That's okay too. Um, but I will say, Kim, what I have heard from women is when they learn and understand the choices in modern adoption, when they can share that they made the choices about their adoption, they feel more confident in their decisions, which is normal for us in any part of life. When we're told what we have to do versus when we get to choose what we do, those are two very different outcomes, almost 100% of the time.
I love the way that you answered that, Heather. That is such a deep question. And it's important to, when you are working with your adoption professional, find out what post-adoption support is available for you. Is there
Hmm.
counseling? Is there peer counseling? Can you talk with and be in touch with other women who have walked this path before you, either recently or many years ago? Both can be valuable. I know that talking with someone who's been in your shoes, it really helps. They understand the thoughts and feelings. They understand the ups and downs. They
Hmm.
understand those hormonal shifts that can make us feel very negatively, but actually it's just the hormones. And the heart of a mother is always, no matter what choice she has made for her child, the heart of a mother is always going to have mixed emotions, bittersweet, love, concern, hope, sadness in some cases too. And yes, sometimes regret. But when you are choosing adoption, remember your why. You
Hmm.
chose adoption not because of lack of love, because you loved your child so much and you wanted and needed to choose a family who could carry out the care and nurturing and love and provision for this child for all of those days when you were not able to do that. And
Hmm.
through adoption, you were able to provide all of those things for this child.
Right. And certainly I don't want to, take any of this lightly because adoption can bring grief, sadness, and hard emotions. And it's really important that we be honest about that. But grief and regret are not the same thing. In fact, many women still say they believe adoption was the right decision for their child, even when going through those difficult emotions afterwards. And what they have shared helps the most is having that support, the counseling, and an adoption plan in place where they were informed, respected, and involved in every step of the process.
Hmm. Great point. Grief and regret are two different things. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of Let's Talk Adoption. You can go and listen to past episodes if you didn't get enough today. And you can also write to us at letstalkadoption.com and let us know your thoughts, feelings, and questions that we can discuss on a future episode. And so we're excited to continue on with these future episodes and talk with you again very soon. And we will see you on the next one.